Question, Mr. Oscapella. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
My name is Eugene Oscapella. I'm an Ottawa lawyer. I have been a lawyer for about 30 years. I've worked in the field of criminal justice policy for much of that time. For the past 20 years, I have worked to a great extent in drug policy. I was the first chair of the Law Reform Commission of Canada Drug Policy Group, and I'm a founding member of the Canadian Foundation for Drug Policy, which is an independent drug policy research group. And for the past 10 years, I've taught drug policy in the Department of Criminology at the University of Ottawa. So some of you may disagree with my remarks, but I would urge you to think that they're not coming from a point of naivete. I've been around the block a few times on this. Under this legislation, as under the current drug legislation, 80% of the students I teach are criminals. 80% of the students I teach at the University of Ottawa are criminals according to this law. The criminal law is an instrument that is supposed to be used as an instrument of last resort when other means of dealing with social issues have failed. We have, with drug policy, used the criminal law as an instrument of first resort. Now, about 80% of my students are criminals. About 10% of them would qualify under this bill for a mandatory term of incarceration of 2 years in a federal penitentiary. Now, I suggest to you, honorable senators, that this is a patently absurd result. When this many people who are otherwise going to grow up to be absolutely fine, productive citizens are criminalized by a law, there is something fundamentally wrong. Something fundamentally wrong with this approach. And I have a quote from a 35-year-old black man and a black American who talked about his drug use during his youth, and I will read this quote. It's a bit blunt, but you'll get the sense of it. He said, "You might just be bored or alone. Everyone was welcome into the club of disaffection, and if the high didn't solve whatever it was that was getting you down, it could at least help you laugh at the world's ongoing folly and see through all the hypocrisy and bullshit and cheap moralism." Under the proposed law, Bill C-15, this man would have been sent in all likelihood, because he admitted to using cocaine as a young man, and using it in a social circumstance is quite common. And the simple fact of sharing cocaine with somebody under our law constitutes the offense of trafficking. He would have done it with other young people, so he would have qualified as committing the offense in an area normally frequented by other youth. Well, he would have never become President of the United States. That was Barack Obama writing in his autobiography. Now, this is the same man that politicians and many other people around Ottawa were drooling over the prospect of having their picture taken next to when he came to Ottawa. And yet the same man, if he'd been a young black man in Canada subject to these laws, we would have sentenced him, as my colleague Maître Roy has said, to a mandatory minimum of 2 years in a federal penitentiary. Surely, in the 21st century, we can do better than that. This bill essentially tinkers with the cosmetics of a prohibitionist system. By prohibition, I mean using the criminal law as the primary instrument for dealing with drug problems. And there are drug problems in the world. The issue is, what is the best way to deal with them? We have chosen the criminal law for the past 100 years in this country. We're now into our second century of prohibition. The first prohibition, real prohibition, being the prohibition of opium in 1908. And there's a fundamental problem with prohibition. If you turn to the presentation, the last page of the presentation that I made, you'll see a slide where I talk about the impact of prohibition on price. And this is why prohibitionist laws are bound to fail. This is very simple economics. These are figures from the United Nations in the mid-1990s. They're talking about the farm gate price of opium, the price that a farmer, in this case in Pakistan, would get for a kilo of opium in the mid-1990s was about $90. Now, a farmer in Afghanistan is getting about $40 or $50 for a kilo of opium. It takes about 10 kilos of opium to make a kilo of heroin. So the cost of production of a kilo of heroin today is about $500 US. By the time that kilo is transported and sold and retailed in the United States, it may be worth several $100,000. In this example, there's a profit margin of 32,000%. from the farm gate price to the final retail price of this product. All the king's horses and all the king's men and all the police of the realm and all the prisons of the realm cannot overwhelm, cannot defeat the power of the laws of economics. Prohibition creates an enormously lucrative black market. The laws of economics haven't changed since the era of alcohol prohibition. The government's laws may have, but the laws of economics have not. This is why prohibitionist laws are doomed to fail. The most powerful nation on earth, the United States, I believe it's still the most powerful nation on earth, has spent perhaps $1 trillion in the past 20 or 30 years fighting its war on drugs. It now incarcerates 2.3 million people, about 500,000 of them, almost 1/4 of them, for drug-related offenses. The United States incarcerates 1/4 of all the human beings imprisoned on earth. Surely, if this model of dealing with drugs through the criminal law could work, the United States, with all the resources at its disposal, could have made it work. Instead, it has an ongoing drug problem. It has exported drug violence to producer countries around the world. It has left a trail of destruction around the world because of its domestic drug policies. And this bill just continues that very same trend. As I say, it's tinkering with the cosmetics of prohibition, while the structure, the foundation of prohibition is seriously flawed.